Imagine 9 young hikers full of energy, laughter, and dreams, setting off into the frozen Ural Mountains of Soviet Russia in 1959. They were skilled, experienced, and determined to conquer the snow-covered pass that lay ahead. But what awaited them in that icy wilderness was something no one could ever have predicted. Weeks later, their lifeless bodies were discovered under horrifying and mysterious circumstances. Some had missing eyes, others had broken bones so severe it seemed as though they were crushed by a force beyond human comprehension. And their campsite, torn open from the inside, as if the group had fled in panic from an unknown terror. To this day, more than 6 decades later, no one truly knows what happened to them on that cold February night. This is the story of the Dyatlov Pass incident, a chilling mystery that continues to haunt investigators, scientists, and conspiracy theorists around the world. The story begins in late January of 1959, when a group of 10 hikers from the Ural Polytechnic Institute set out on a skiing expedition into the remote northern Ural Mountains. They were led by 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, a bright and determined student who was known for his strong leadership skills. The group consisted of 8 men and 2 women, all experienced trekkers, and all eager to earn the prestigious Grade 3 hiker certification, the highest qualification available in the Soviet Union at the time. Spirits were high as they departed, joking, singing, and writing cheerful entries in their journals, unaware that their journey would soon turn into a nightmare. Their planned route was ambitious but carefully thought out. They would travel through snowy ridges, dense forests, and frozen streams, ultimately reaching Otorten, a mountain whose name in the language of the indigenous Mansi people meant "don't go there." But these were young adventurers, proud and fearless, who paid little attention to ominous legends. They believed their training and experience would carry them through. The expedition started smoothly, with the group taking photographs, recording diary entries, and even making playful sketches about their progress. At first, the trip went according to plan. They passed through the village of Vizhai, the last settlement before the wilderness, where locals wished them well. Their backpacks were heavy with food, cameras, tents, and warm clothing, and their confidence radiated in every photo. One of the hikers, Yuri Yudin, however, began feeling ill with joint pain and decided to turn back, a decision that ultimately saved his life. The remaining 9 pressed forward, unaware that they would never return. As the group continued, weather conditions worsened. The snow deepened, the winds howled, and temperatures dropped brutally low. Despite this, their spirits remained unbroken. Diaries recovered later reveal that the hikers maintained a sense of humor, joking about the cold, teasing each other, and making light of their hardships. Their resilience was remarkable, but the environment was unforgiving. Each step into the wilderness took them further away from safety and closer to an unknown fate. On February 1st, the group reached the slopes of Kholat-Syakhl, a mountain whose name meant Dead Mountain in the Mansi language. Instead of moving further down to the safety of the forest, they made a puzzling decision: to pitch their tent on the open, exposed mountainside. Why they chose such a risky location remains one of the great mysteries of the case. Some speculate it was to practice camping in harsh conditions. Others suggest they were lost in the storm. Whatever the reason, this would be the place of their final camp. That night, under a moonless sky, the hikers set up their tent, cooking a simple meal inside. Photographs from their last hours show them smiling and relaxed, bundled in their gear, unaware of the horror that awaited. Within hours, something would drive them to slash open their own tent and flee barefoot into the snow, leaving behind everything they owned. And whatever it was, they never escaped it. The hikers' disappearance was not immediately noticed. In fact, it took several weeks before anyone realized something was terribly wrong. The group had agreed to send a telegram once they returned to their base camp. But when the expected date passed and no message came, their families grew uneasy. At first, officials dismissed their concerns, suggesting that the hikers were simply delayed due to weather. But the days turned into weeks and silence hung heavy. The parents of the hikers grew desperate, pressuring authorities to act. Finally, on February 20th, search teams were sent into the frozen wilderness to look for them. Nobody knew then that what the rescuers would uncover would defy explanation. The first sign of the hikers' fate came on February 26th, when searchers stumbled upon the group's abandoned tent on the slopes of Kholat-Syakhl. At first glance, it appeared strange but not alarming. The tent was still standing, partially covered by snow, with boots, jackets, and supplies neatly arranged inside. But then came the shocking discovery. The canvas was not torn from the outside, as if attacked. It had been slashed open from within. It was clear that the hikers had cut their way out in a desperate rush, abandoning their belongings behind. Even their shoes were left untouched. For seasoned hikers, running barefoot into the snow was unthinkable, unless they were fleeing from something far more terrifying than the deadly cold. Rescue teams followed the footprints leading away from the tent. They counted at least 8 or 9 sets of tracks, some showing bare feet, others with only socks, leading downhill toward a forest about a mile away. The tracks suggested the group had walked, not run, but eventually the snow and wind erased them. Following the trail, searchers soon made their next gruesome discovery: the first 2 bodies. At the edge of the forest, beneath a tall cedar tree, the bodies of Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko were found. Both were barefoot, dressed only in their underclothes, and lying near the remains of a small fire. Their hands were burned, as if they had desperately tried to keep warm by feeding the flames with branches. Above them, the cedar tree's bark was stripped high up, suggesting they had climbed in a frantic attempt to spot their tent or perhaps escape something chasing them. The sight was disturbing. 2 young men who had braved blizzards and mountains reduced to frozen, almost unrecognizable figures in the snow. Not far from the cedar, searchers found 3 more bodies: expedition leader Igor Dyatlov, Zenaida Kolmogorova, and Rustam Slobodin. They were positioned as if they had been trying to crawl back toward the tent, faces turned toward the slope. Their clothing was insufficient for the freezing conditions, just sweaters, pants, and socks, no boots. Rustam had a fractured skull, though not enough to kill him outright. The evidence suggested that they had desperately attempted to return to camp but never made it. By now 5 hikers were accounted for, but 4 were still missing. And the truth of what had happened that night was slipping deeper into darkness. The search for the remaining hikers took months, as snow buried the forest deeper with every passing day. Not until May, when the thaw began, did rescuers uncover the last 4 bodies in a ravine about 75 meters from the cedar tree. What they found there would elevate the Dyatlov Pass incident from tragedy to unsolvable enigma. These 4 had suffered horrific injuries that could not easily be explained by exposure alone. Some of their bodies were missing eyes, 1 was missing a tongue, and several had internal damage so violent it resembled the aftermath of a car crash. And yet, strangely, their skin bore no external wounds to match the damage inside. It was as if some unseen force had crushed them from within. The 4 bodies discovered in May shocked even the most hardened investigators. They were far more disturbing than the first 5. Lyudmila Dubinina, one of the 2 women in the group, was found without her tongue, lips, and part of her facial tissue. Her eyes were also missing. It looked grotesque, almost inhuman. Next to her lay Alexander Kolovatov and Zenaida's best friend, Nikolai Thibault Brignol. Nikolai's skull was shattered with such force that experts said the blow was comparable to a car accident. The last of the 4, Semyon Zolotaryov, had broken ribs and internal bleeding so severe it was as though he had been crushed by something unimaginably heavy. The condition of these bodies seemed to suggest violence, yet no external attacker could be found. Adding to the confusion was their clothing. Unlike the first group, these 4 were partially better dressed, wearing pieces of clothing seemingly taken from their dead comrades. Dubinina, for example, wore Krivonishenko's burned pants, as though in desperation they had shared garments to survive the cold. Some clothes contained high levels of radiation, a fact that baffled scientists and investigators alike. Radiation testing was not common in simple accidents, so why had traces of it appeared on their belongings? Was it environmental contamination, or did it suggest something darker, perhaps secret military involvement? Autopsies deepened the mystery. The injuries to these 4 were inconsistent with an avalanche, which had initially been proposed as the cause of death. An avalanche would have buried them all together, not left them scattered, and certainly would not have caused such specific trauma while sparing the tent and the slope. Moreover, the fractured skulls and broken ribs had no accompanying external wounds. The flesh wasn't ripped or torn, it wasn't crushed beneath snow or rock. It was almost as if something had applied pressure from inside their bodies. The medical examiner admitted he could not explain how such damage was possible. The absence of Dubinina's tongue was one of the most chilling details of all. Some argued it was the work of scavenging animals, but others found that explanation unsatisfying, pointing out the precision of the removal and the absence of other typical signs of animal feeding. For many, this detail alone transformed the tragedy into a legend. Was she silenced by something or someone who didn't want the truth revealed? The official Soviet investigation concluded vaguely, the hikers died due to a compelling natural force. That was all. No further explanation, no naming of culprits, no definitive cause. Families of the victims were left devastated and confused, given only fragments of the truth. Locals in the area whispered of curses, supernatural entities, or even government experiments gone wrong. The uncertainty made the story grow darker with each retelling, and soon the Dyatlov Pass became synonymous with mystery itself. And so, what began as a hopeful expedition of young adventurers turned into one of the most haunting unsolved cases of the 20th century. The ravine where the four were found was silent, but it seemed to echo with unanswered questions. Why did 9 skilled hikers flee their tent barefoot in the snow? What kind of force could shatter bones without breaking skin? And why did the Soviet Union close the case so abruptly, leaving it buried in secrecy? As word of the Dyatlov Pass incident spread beyond the Soviet Union, the world began to speculate about what could have driven 9 experienced hikers into such chaos. One of the earliest theories was that an avalanche had struck their tent, forcing them to flee. On the surface, this explanation seemed logical, but when examined closely, it collapsed under its own weight. The slope where they had pitched their tent was not steep enough for a powerful avalanche, and rescuers found no evidence of snow buildup or displaced debris consistent with one. Even more puzzling, the tent and supplies were still visible on the surface of the snow weeks later, untouched by any such disaster. If an avalanche had struck, it should have buried everything under tons of ice. Another explanation suggested a violent storm or katabatic wind had terrorized the group. Katabatic winds are sudden, powerful gusts that sweep down mountainsides with hurricane-like force. Could such winds have panicked the hikers into fleeing? Possibly, but it didn't explain the devastating internal injuries, the radiation traces, or the bizarre choice to cut their way out of the tent instead of calmly unzipping it. Experienced hikers like Dyatlov's group would have known how to handle storms. Their decision to run barefoot into freezing darkness hinted at something far more terrifying than weather. Then came whispers of military involvement. In the 1950s, the Ural Mountains were not far from secret Soviet testing grounds, where parachute mines, rockets, and other classified weapons were developed. Some researchers believe the hikers may have accidentally stumbled into the path of an experiment. Explosions from parachute mines, for example, could produce shock waves strong enough to cause internal injuries without leaving external marks. Strange orange orbs reported in the sky around that time by locals fueled the speculation further. Were these hikers unfortunate witnesses to military technology the Soviet Union wanted to keep hidden? If so, their deaths might have been covered up under the vague label of compelling natural force. But the radiation traces on some of their clothing added even more fuel to this theory. Why would civilian hikers carry radiation on their garments unless they had come into contact with contaminated material? Some suggested they unknowingly camped in an area affected by nuclear testing. Others wondered whether one of the hikers, perhaps unknowingly, had carried clothing borrowed from workers exposed to radiation in the past. None of these explanations ever fully satisfied investigators, leaving the question wide open. For others, the answer could not be found in human hands, but in something far stranger. UFO enthusiasts claimed that the glowing orbs seen in the night sky were not weapons but alien craft. Perhaps the hikers had witnessed something extraterrestrial, and whatever they encountered caused panic, injury, and death. While this theory was often dismissed as science fiction, it continued to captivate imaginations because it filled in the gaps left by science. After all, what natural force crushes bones without leaving bruises, strips a young woman of her tongue, and terrifies 9 people into abandoning warmth and safety for barefoot death in the snow? By now, the Dyatlov Pass was no longer just a physical location. It had become a stage for endless speculation, folklore, and dread. Each theory, whether scientific or supernatural, seemed to answer one question while raising 2 more. What terrified them enough to slash their own tent? Why did some die of exposure while others bore catastrophic injuries? And above all, why, after more than 60 years, does no single explanation fit all the evidence? The more people tried to solve the mystery, the deeper and darker it became. Among the many theories that sprouted in the aftermath of the Dyatlov Pass discovery, one of the most bizarre yet persistent was the idea of a Yeti attack. Soviet investigators themselves were not the ones who pushed this theory. It emerged later through sensational media and whispers in local folklore. Some claimed that large footprints had been spotted near the campsite, though official reports never confirmed this. The state of the bodies, particularly the severe internal injuries without external wounds, fed into the notion that a powerful creature might have attacked them. Photographs recovered from the hikers' own cameras added fuel to this idea. One final grainy picture seemed to show a tall, dark, human-like figure standing among the snowy trees. To this day, some believe that the group encountered something not of science but of legend. The indigenous Mansi people who lived in the surrounding areas also became part of the speculation. Some wondered if the hikers had trespassed on sacred land, provoking an attack. The mountain itself, Kholat Shakal, carried a grim reputation, its name translating to Mountain of the Dead. Could the locals have taken revenge for the hikers' intrusion? However, there was little evidence to support this theory. The Mansi were known to be peaceful, and investigators found no signs of struggle with outside attackers. Moreover, nothing was stolen from the campsite. Money, supplies, and valuables remained untouched. If this had been a human attack, logic suggested there would have been clear motives or evidence of looting. Another chilling possibility raised was psychological breakdown. The combination of isolation, freezing temperatures, and howling winds might have triggered paranoia or even hallucinations. Some suggested a phenomenon known as infrasound could have been at play. When wind passes over mountain ridges, it can create low-frequency sound waves, too deep for human ears to register, but capable of inducing feelings of fear, nausea, and even panic. Could this strange acoustic effect have driven the hikers into irrational terror, causing them to slash their way out of the tent and run into the night? It explained their frantic escape, but again, it did not explain the catastrophic injuries or missing body parts. Still others pointed the finger at secret Soviet experiments with drugs, chemicals, or biological weapons. The Cold War was in full swing, and the Soviet Union was notorious for its hidden research projects. If the hikers had stumbled into the wrong place at the wrong time, they may have become unintentional test subjects. Some researchers speculated that parachute mines or experimental weapon blasts caused the internal trauma, while others wondered if chemical exposure explained the missing soft tissue. The government's vague, unsatisfying conclusion, combined with the swift closing of the case files, only encouraged suspicions of a cover-up. Yet despite all these competing theories, none could account for every disturbing detail. If a Yeti or wild animal attacked, why were no external wounds visible? If the Mansi were involved, why were no weapons used and valuables left behind? If infrasound or hysteria drove them to panic, how did they sustain car crash-level injuries? And if the military had a hand in this, why were some of the bodies found months later still partially intact and unburied? The Dyatlov Pass incident seemed to defy every attempt at logical closure. Each explanation was like a key that unlocked one door while leaving the others bolted shut. As time passed, the hikers' diaries and photographs became eerie relics of their final days. Their smiling faces, silly sketches, and light-hearted jokes stood in stark contrast to the horror of their deaths. The grainy photograph of the dark figure in the trees only deepened the sense that something unnatural lurked in the mountains. Whether human, animal, or something unexplainable, the force that struck them down left an indelible mark not just on the snow of Kholat Shakal, but on history itself. The Soviet investigation into the Dyatlov Pass incident was as strange as the tragedy itself. From the beginning, the authorities seemed uneasy, reluctant to share details or provide clarity. Families of the victims were given vague explanations and were often discouraged from asking questions. Officially, the case was labeled as closed, with the infamous conclusion that the hikers had died because of a compelling natural force. But that phrase was so ambiguous, it sparked more questions than answers. What was this force? Why couldn't the investigators name it? It felt as though they were deliberately hiding something, or someone. Eyewitnesses later recalled that strange details were quietly covered up. For example, Some of the rescuers claimed that the bodies of the last 4 hikers, found in May, were strangely tanned, their skin darker than normal. Others said their hair had turned gray or white. Yet these observations were absent from official reports. Photographs showed their corpses in bizarre, almost unnatural states, but no explanation was offered. Radiation tests on their clothing were confirmed, but authorities brushed them off, suggesting contamination from everyday sources. The secrecy surrounding these anomalies only deepened suspicions that the truth was being withheld. The families were outraged. They had entrusted their children to the care of the state, and now they were being met with silence and evasion. Many demanded access to the case files, but their requests were ignored. Over time, rumors began to swirl that military officials had been directly involved in the cover-up. Why else would radiation appear in the evidence? Why else would the government close the case so quickly? For grieving parents, the silence was unbearable, fueling speculation that their children had been victims of something far larger than an accident. Even the search party members felt uneasy. Some later confessed that they had been pressured to keep quiet about certain details, especially those that didn't fit the official narrative. The photograph of the strange figure found on one of the hikers' cameras was dismissed as nothing more than a poorly exposed shot, but to many, it looked like evidence of an intruder, or worse. Locals also reported seeing glowing orbs in the sky around the time of the tragedy, but these testimonies were either ignored or buried in files that wouldn't resurface for decades. As the years went by, conspiracy theories grew like wildfire. Some suggested that the hikers had witnessed secret weapons testing and were silenced. Others believed that foreign spies had been involved, killing them to prevent secrets from leaking. Still others leaned toward supernatural explanations. Alien encounters, mysterious creatures, or curses tied to the mountain's grim name, Dead Mountain. The truth was never revealed. But the secrecy of the Soviet Union made it easy to believe that something sinister had been buried. By the 1960s, the Dyatlov Pass incident was already being whispered about as one of the most frightening and unexplained mysteries in Russia. The mountain where the tragedy occurred became a place of both fear and fascination. Hikers who dared to travel there often spoke of an eerie silence, as if the mountain itself remembered the horror. Some claimed they felt watched, others said they heard strange noises in the night winds. The investigation may have been officially closed, but the story was only beginning to grow into legend. Decades passed before the Dyatlov Pass incident was revisited in any official capacity. For years, the case remained locked away in dusty Soviet archives, hidden from public view. But whispers of the tragedy never died. In the 1990s, after the fall of the Soviet Union, portions of the files were finally released. Amateur researchers, journalists, and scientists pored over them, hungry for answers. What they found only deepened the mystery. Many crucial photographs were missing, some pages were torn out, and whole sections appeared censored. It was clear the Soviet government had not told the full story. The reopening of the case ignited a new wave of speculation, pulling the Dyatlov Pass back into the world's spotlight. Scientists attempted to approach the mystery logically, stripping away the rumors and focusing on evidence. One group of researchers suggested that a small, localized avalanche could still have been the culprit. But the problem persisted. The slope wasn't steep enough, and the tent had not been buried. Another theory involved a rare natural phenomenon known as a slab avalanche, where a large sheet of snow slides down with crushing force. This could, in theory, explain the internal injuries, but again, it did not explain the missing eyes and tongue, nor the strange radiation. The avalanche theory always seemed like a puzzle piece that almost fit, but left huge gaps unfilled. Others turned to hypothermia and its strange side effects. A phenomenon called paradoxical undressing sometimes occurs when victims of hypothermia become so disoriented that they remove their clothes, believing themselves to be overheated. Could this explain why some hikers were barely dressed? Possibly. But the tent being slashed from the inside, the deliberate march into the snow, and the catastrophic injuries still didn't align with this explanation. The hikers' behavior did not match simple hypothermia victims. They were experienced outdoorsmen, not amateurs. In 2019, a team of Russian scientists announced they were reopening the investigation once more, determined to apply modern technology to the decades-old case. Their conclusion? A rare type of avalanche combined with high winds may have forced the hikers out of the tent. Computer simulations and data models, some even inspired by animation software from the movie Frozen, suggested that compacted snow slabs could have inflicted injuries similar to those observed on the bodies. For some, this explanation finally offered closure, but for others it raised the same old doubts. If it truly was an avalanche, why did the hikers cut open the tent calmly and walk away rather than panic and run? Why were some of their bodies mutilated in ways snow alone couldn't explain? The avalanche explanation was accepted by Russia's prosecutor general in 2020 as the official cause of death. Yet many experts and researchers found it unsatisfying. It felt like a neat, convenient solution offered to close a chapter rather than solve it. Even with computer models and scientific jargon, the case still refused to give up its secrets. Too many details remained odd, uncanny, and out of place. It was as if the mountain itself mocked every attempt at reason, whispering that some mysteries will always resist human understanding. And so, the Dyatlov Pass incident entered the modern era still unresolved. Technology could simulate avalanches, hypothermia could be explained, and military cover-ups could be theorized. But the human element, the sheer terror that must have gripped 9 people in the dead of night, remains elusive. Whatever drove them to flee barefoot into the blizzard, it was powerful enough to override every instinct of survival and training. That is the part science cannot model, the fear that lived in those final moments. The Dyatlov Pass incident was no longer just a cold case, it became a legend. Over the decades, the story seeped into popular culture, capturing the imagination of writers, filmmakers, and conspiracy theorists around the world. Books were written, documentaries filmed, and countless online forums dedicated entire communities to dissecting the details. Each new generation rediscovered the story, and each time, it felt just as haunting as when it first emerged. The hikers' photographs, smiling faces forever frozen in time, created a painful contrast to the horror of their end. It was this emotional dissonance, youth, hope, and laughter snuffed out by something inexplicable, that made the Dyatlov mystery unforgettable. The case gained notoriety not only because of its strangeness, but also because of its silence. Unlike other tragedies where answers eventually emerge, this one refused closure. People are naturally drawn to what they cannot explain, and the Dyatlov Pass was the perfect storm of unanswered questions. Why were the hikers' bodies found in such strange conditions? What force could shatter bones without breaking skin? Why was radiation present? And above all, why did the Soviet Union close the case so abruptly, leaving more questions than answers? These uncertainties ensured the story lived on, whispered across decades and borders. In Russia, the incident became folklore, with locals weaving it into ghost stories told around campfires. Some spoke of a cursed mountain, haunted by spirits of the dead. Others claimed the hikers had angered supernatural beings, or that the land itself had rejected them. The name Kholat Shachel, the Mountain of the Dead, became forever tied to the tragedy. Tourists and adventurers began flocking to the pass, hoping to retrace the group's steps. Each new visitor carried a mix of reverence and fear, as if stepping onto sacred, haunted ground. Beyond Russia, the Dyatlov Pass incident fueled the imagination of global audiences. It appeared in documentaries on major networks, was dramatized in movies, and inspired countless podcasts. True crime enthusiasts, paranormal investigators, and scientists all found themselves drawn to the same icy mystery. Each retelling highlighted different aspects. Some leaned into government conspiracy, others into UFOs, and still others into natural disasters. Yet no matter the angle, the story always ended the same way. With 9 young hikers dead in the snow, their fate sealed by something we still cannot fully comprehend. The photographs and diaries left behind by the hikers gave the case a deeply human dimension. They showed not just faceless victims, but vibrant personalities. Igor, the strong leader. Zina, the cheerful and caring friend. Rustam, the determined athlete. And Lyudmila, the sharp-witted young woman whose life ended so brutally. Their last photographs, snapped in the snow, revealed laughter and camaraderie, unaware of the doom that crept closer. These images have since become haunting icons, studied and debated by millions who feel an odd sense of connection to strangers lost long ago. In many ways, the Dyatlov Pass incident is no longer just about finding the truth, it is about the nature of mystery itself. It shows how humans crave explanations but are unsettled when none are found. It demonstrates how tragedy can grow into legend when unanswered questions linger, and it reminds us that sometimes the most terrifying stories are not the ones with clear villains, but those where the villain is never identified at all. Imagine that last night. February 1st, 1959. The group of 9 sits huddled inside their tent on the slope of Kholat Shachel. Outside, the wind howls like a living thing, its icy fingers clawing at the fabric of the tent. Inside, the air is warmer, filled with the smell of food and the faint sound of laughter. Their journals and photographs reveal that spirits were high even that evening. They had braved harsh winds, pitched their tent in the open snow, and joked about the cold in their diaries. No one could have known that these would be their final entries. The tent, sturdy and tightly secured, should have been their fortress against the mountain's cruelty. But something shattered that fragile safety. At some point in the night, terror struck. What exactly triggered it remains unknown, but the evidence is clear. The hikers slashed open the tent from the inside and fled. They did not calmly unzip the flap. They did not gather shoes, coats, or supplies. They burst out barefoot and half-dressed into sub-zero temperatures, as though something inside the tent, or approaching it, was too horrifying to confront. Their footprints, orderly at first, suggested they walked downhill rather than ran, but the decision was no less strange. 9 skilled hikers, abandoning everything they needed to survive, defied all reason. Only overwhelming fear could have driven them to such an act. As they stumbled into the forest, the group became separated. Doroshenko and Krivonishenko ended up beneath the cedar tree, trying to build a fire with trembling, frozen hands. They stripped branches and even climbed the tree, desperate for fuel or perhaps for a better vantage point. But their efforts failed, and they succumbed to the cold. Not far away, Dyatlov, Zenaida, and Rustam attempted to make their way back uphill, perhaps realizing their mistake and hoping to return to the safety of the tent. Exhaustion and frostbite claimed them before they could reach it, their bodies lying scattered on the slope, frozen in place like fallen statues. Meanwhile, the remaining 4, Dubinina, Kolovatov, Thibaut Brignol, and Zolotaryov, pressed deeper into the woods, maybe searching for better shelter. They found a ravine, where they tried to shield themselves from the wind. But here their ordeal turned far more violent. Something inflicted horrific injuries upon them, shattered ribs, crushed skulls, and internal trauma so severe it defied logic. Was it the force of falling snow, a hidden explosion, or something even stranger? Dubinina lost her tongue and eyes, details that to this day remain among the most unsettling in the entire case. Their deaths, unlike the others, were not simply from exposure. Something else had happened in that ravine. Theories about that night differ wildly, but one thing is certain: fear guided their every step. Fear made them abandon warmth. Fear made them walk into darkness barefoot. Fear split them apart and drove them toward their deaths. What did they see or hear that night on the mountain? Did the sky glow with the orange orbs villagers later claimed to witness? Did the earth tremble with secret weapons testing? Or did the group fall victim to some force older and darker than any of these explanations? We may never know. What we are left with is a puzzle of human desperation. 9 intelligent, experienced hikers faced something so terrifying that it overpowered survival instinct itself. Their final hours, though reconstructed in fragments, echo with panic, pain, and mystery. The tent, the footprints, the bodies, the injuries, all remain like pieces of a broken mirror, reflecting a horror no one has yet been able to fully see. And that is why, even more than 60 years later, the Dyatlov Pass incident is not just remembered, but obsessed over. It feels less like history and more like a warning whispered by the mountain itself. In the years after the tragedy, countless investigations were launched, each promising answers, but delivering only more questions. The official Soviet inquiry in 1959 declared the hikers had died due to a compelling natural force. It was a vague, almost evasive phrase that satisfied no one. Rumors spread rapidly, blaming everything from secret military experiments to hostile native tribes, from avalanches to alien encounters. The case file was quietly closed, and for decades tucked away in archives. The truth remained buried as deeply as the bodies had been beneath the snow. But the Dyatlov Pass incident refused to fade, whispering through history like a ghost that would not rest. In the 1990s, after the fall of the Soviet Union, documents resurfaced. Investigators revisited the site, journalists dug into long-forgotten reports, and families demanded real answers. New theories bloomed. Some argued a slab avalanche invisible in its aftermath crushed the hikers. Others claimed katabatic winds, violent and sudden, drove them into panic. But critics pointed out flaws in each theory. Why were the injuries so uneven, so brutal, and yet with no external wounds? Why would trained hikers who had pitched tents in storms before react so chaotically? These contradictions fed the legend rather than solved it. More modern explanations involve infrasound, a phenomenon where low-frequency vibrations created by the wind can induce panic, hallucinations, and irrational behavior. It's a chillingly scientific possibility. Fear born not from monsters, but from the mountain itself. Yet still, many remain unconvinced. Could mere sound waves explain missing eyes, missing tongues, and crushed rib cages? Could vibrations drive 9 rational people to slash their tent open rather than calmly exit? The deeper one digs, the more the ground beneath the Dyatlov Pass seems to shift, offering no solid answers. Meanwhile, the more speculative theories refuse to die. Witnesses in nearby villages claim to see orange orbs streaking across the night sky around the time of the hikers' deaths. Some spoke of secret Soviet missile tests that might have gone horribly wrong. Others whispered of extraterrestrial visitors, or even supernatural curses tied to the land itself. These claims may sound fantastical, but in the vacuum left by incomplete evidence, they thrive. And perhaps that's what makes the Dyatlov Pass incident so powerful. It sits precisely at the crossroads of fact and myth, science and the unknown. Today, the pass itself carries the name Dyatlov Pass, forever marking the tragedy. Tourists, journalists, and investigators still trek there, staring out across the snow-blanketed wilderness and imagining those final hours. What really happened that night remains unsolved, a puzzle frozen in time. Maybe it was avalanche, maybe it was military secrecy, or maybe something darker. The mountain knows, but it isn't speaking. And so the case remains open, not officially, but in the minds of millions who still wonder, what force can strip away all logic, all reason, and all hope in the dead of night? The Dyatlov Pass incident is not just a mystery, it is a mirror. It reflects our deepest fear of the unknown, our inability to accept that sometimes, no matter how hard we search, we will never uncover the truth. Perhaps that's why it endures, why you are watching this story right now. Because unsolved mysteries haunt us not with answers, but with silence. And that silence, cold and endless like the Ural Mountains themselves, is far more terrifying than any explanation could ever be. And so, the Dyatlov Pass incident remains one of the most chilling unsolved mysteries in history. What do you think happened on that mountain? Was it an avalanche, a military cover-up, or something truly beyond our understanding? Drop your theories in the comments below. I'll be reading every single one. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more haunting mysteries from around the world. Until next time, goodbye. But remember, some mountains keep their secrets forever.